Welcome to the Wizards Brew podcast. I'm Carl Jalm.
And I'm Daniel Nice.
For those of you who were listening to us for our first
We're back.
28 episodes, yeah, we're back. Sorry for being gone and sorry for not saying anything. Yeah, there's just a lot going on in our lives. New jobs, all that stuff. So we have a solid schedule now for recording, for posting episodes, just to keep you guys in the loop. We're going to be recording Tuesdays and posting every week. The aim is every Friday morning you'll find a new episode. Now, for the future, we are thinking of a couple of other options to, keep us in check. One of the things that we have discussed is maybe setting up a Patreon for the podcast.
Yeah, we figured if enough people are listening and you all really like what we're doing, we can eventually maybe just focus on this 100%, but that would be very, very hard. But right now, this is a passion project, and, everything helps, honestly.
Yeah, right now, we are just doing it just to get the info out there. But if you guys are interested in us having a Patreon, sending us maybe a couple bucks because you like what we're doing, just let us know. If we do have a Patreon set up, we'll make sure to have some sort of benefits. We're thinking of stuff like having a private Discord server for our patrons. Maybe, if you donate X amount per month, you can actually tune in and listen to our recording sessions, or you can contribute hey, here's a new deck I've been working on, I want to know what you think, and maybe we'll feature on the podcast, stuff like that.
Yeah, kind of like what we're normally doing, except that, maybe we can have somebody on the show and little things like that, just kind of more fun things to keep things involved and get people involved as well. And, people like that stuff, so we figured, hey, why not give it a shot?
Yeah, exactly. Now, as far as the content of the show goes, we are changing a little bit compared to what we were doing before. I know before a lot of our episodes were focused on the actual competitive scene and covering all the big tournaments and stuff. We're going to try to get a little bit away from that, get back to the core of the show as it was in the first couple of episodes, more focused on brews and the actual strategy of deck building, and maybe doing some number crunching here or there to figure out, how many lands should I play, how many lands of this color should I play, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we'll definitely try that more often, so that way we can kind of keep to the Wizards Brew aspect and not Wizards Pro Tour scene,
Yeah, exactly. And brewing is always good in, a setting where things are changing. So we may be focusing more on Standard compared to the other formats in the future, just because Standard changes a lot more often than the other formats. We will still talk about Modern and Legacy here or there, maybe occasionally Vintage and Commander, but we are definitely going to start focusing more on the Standard format. We realize the vast majority of people who play Magic play Standard. And if
you're not playing Standard, you're in Limited or you're in Modern. Very rarely are people let's talk about Legacy. It's we love to talk about Legacy all the time, but when a new card makes a splash, everybody knows about it, like Leovold.
yeah, stuff like that. Anytime there's a big card in Legacy, literally everyone in the Legacy team already knows about it.
Right.
So that's just plans for where the podcast is going to go. But first, we need to talk about the set that's coming out right now that we have just come back in time for, and that's Amonkhet.
This set is so flavorful. Whether you like the inventions or not, whatever they're called, I forget what they're called off the top of my head, you gotta admit, the flavor's on point, man.
Yeah, the new masterpieces are absolutely amazing. I mean, the art, the frame, we can leave that to... We can leave that
discretion.
To people who, we can leave that to the side. But just the variety of cards that we're seeing in this is a lot of fun. It's going to make Limited really interesting if anyone opens any of these. I actually kind of like a few of them, so we'll see how that goes. But as far as deck building goes, the new cards is what we're worried about. So first what we're going to talk about is the new mechanics for anyone who hasn't been reading articles from the Mothership. If you need a little bit of a refresher on the mechanics, we're going to go over them right now. First up, we have Aftermath. And this is an interesting mechanic that we see on a handful of cards. All of these cards So these are essentially split cards. But split cards before all the split cards we've seen before, it's you cast it as either card A or card B from your hand. A little bit
or
different.
as one card.
Yeah, or as one card with fuse. So this Aftermath literally reads, cast this spell only from your graveyard, then exile it. So Aftermath is only on one half of the card, and you'll see these. The top half is vertical on the card, and that's the half you can cast from your hand. The other half is sideways on the card, and that's the half you can cast from your graveyard. So they look a little weird, but they stand out, so you can easily tell which ones are the Aftermath cards.
Yeah, they are. Look, man, I'm not a big fan of that art style, the way they chose it, because if you've actually looked at the art, it's a panoramic done art style. Like, Insult and Entry is absolutely gorgeous when it's spread across as an art piece. On the card, it really doesn't do it justice. I recommend going find the artist and looking at the original pieces and really enjoying it from there.
Yeah, definitely. The original arts look really sweet for these cards. Now, with the Aftermath cards, as I said, it is Tuesday. We haven't received the full spoiler yet, so many of them are sorcery, and then the second half is sorcery. There's a few that are the half from your hand is instant, and then the Aftermath half is sorcery. I don't think there's been a single one that is an instant with Aftermath yet.
Yeah, as of this recording, we haven't seen any that have both instances, but there's a couple that have the instant and the sorcery part of it, which is actually really, really sweet, kind of like Heaven and Earth. Those are really good cards.
Yeah, we're gonna get into a few of those in just a moment. So that's Aftermath. It's you've got kind of like this split card. Basically, the second half is like a card you can cast without using a card in your hand, or something like that. It's a very interesting mechanic. It's almost like Flashback, but not really. We're excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, it's gonna be really sweet. It's gonna do a lot of stuff. Whenever a new mechanic is printed, when it comes to the Eternal formats, something gets busted. We're gonna find out within a couple of months, but something will be busted, and we were like, "Oh my god, why didn't we see that before?"
Yep. Now, the next mechanic that we have is cycling, and this is a returning mechanic. So cards with cycling have in their text box cycling and then a mana cost or some other sort of cost. And what it means is you pay that cost and discard the card that has cycling on it, and you draw a card.
Yep. Very simple, very easy. Most of the time they're colorless. Every once in a while they're on color. But outside of that, this mechanic is from the Stone Ages. This is an old mechanic, and man, everybody loved this mechanic because it's like, oh man, this card isn't great right now in my hand. I better draw a card. Oops, found my win con. Like, that's how it works. It's really cool.
Yeah, now the cycling cost does change among cards. The most common cycling cost is just 2 mana, but there's a few that like it'll be a single mana of a color, like 1 blue mana or 1 green mana. Or we have seen in cycling cards from other sets, such as on Street Wraith, the cycling cost is pay 2 life. So you could have anything as the cost for cycling. It just so happens that everything we have seen so far uses mana. So cycling is just very good. Like you just said, Danny. Once the card becomes bad, you just cycle it away.
Yeah, it's trust me. If you haven't played with cycling before, like you haven't done it in Cube or you haven't done it in EDH or anything like that, you're going to love cycling and wonder why you've never played with these cards before. I promise you.
Now, the next mechanic we have, this one is called Exert. So when you exert a creature, like a creature will say, when this happens, you may exert this creature. What that means is that on your next untap step, it does not untap. So
most of the time, it seems like most of these are whenever this creature attacks, exert it. It's kind of an aggressive type of thing. But it's so like you would go to combat, declare the attackers, and then you would go exert this creature that has exert on it. And then it will not untap on your untap step.
Yeah, so the ones that say, when it attacks, exert, it basically you attack, and then a trigger happens asking you, would you like to exert this creature? When the trigger resolves, you decide yes or no, If you choose yes, the thing happens. If you choose no, the thing does not happen. So this is a very interesting mechanic. It's kind of you're trading its next attack phase for an effect, which in Limited is very strong, because a lot of times you'll attack and maybe your creature won't survive. So this way you get that bonus effect, and sometimes you don't even care that it doesn't survive.
Yeah, like one of them is it's a green creature, I think, and it's a 3-mana 2/2, the Watchful Naga. You may exert it as it attacks if you do draw a card. Simple, easy, whatever.
Yeah, so you have this just gray ogre that when it you can just trade it in for a card. That seems great.
Yep, seems fine to me. Like, I'm okay with that.
Very interesting for Limited. Not sure if any of these exert creatures are going to have much of an effect on constructed formats, but there's a handful that might. We'll get into those some other day, but right now we're going to continue with the mechanics. Next up, we have Embalm, and Embalm. This is very, very on theme for an Egyptian plane.
Yeah, 100%. This is super sweet. It's like Flashback for creatures.
Yes, so everyone's always been talking about, since Flashback came out, they're ever going to print Flashback for creatures, and they finally kind of did. So Embalm has a mana cost. So, for instance, I'm looking at Angel of Sanctions, which has Embalm, 5 and a white. So that means pay 5 and a white and exile this card from your graveyard. Then you create a token that is a copy of it, except it is a white zombie with no mana cost, and you can only Embalm as a sorcery. And it keeps its other types. So Angel of Sanctions is an angel. It becomes a white zombie angel when you Embalm it. So
that's super cool.
Yeah, and so that means like some of these creatures with Embalm have enter the battlefield effects. Some of them have other relevant keyword abilities. So you get a second go at this creature, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, Angel of Sanction's like super sweet anyways. Like, to quickly touch on it, it enters the battlefield and exiles a target non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. So you get your choice of whichever one. It's like, oh, I'll exile your little dude. Oh, you played a better threat? You killed it? Okay, I'll just exile your bigger dude.
Yeah, it's really sweet. So there's a lot of cards that use Embalm very, they're very tricky about Embalm. This is a really cool mechanic. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to see standard play. It could if standard slows down a bit, because the Embalm costs are, in the vast majority of cases, higher than the actual mana costs. And some of them have effects that are strong enough. But we'll see.
Some of them...
Yeah.
I was going to say, some of them are really, really powerful. When they come back, they redo the trigger. It's like 2 triggers on that. It's really insane. But, I mean, it's a mechanic that really requires a lot of setting up. And since there's a little bit of graveyard hate, it's going to be much harder to do.
Yeah, so there is some graveyard hate, and we'll get into one of the most effective ones later when we're talking about specific cards for standard. But we have one more thing to touch on for Amonkhet, and that is -1/-1 counters. Yes, these guys are back.
Super sweet. Love it. It's awesome. Like, there's just -1/-1 counters. They get bonuses for it. Some don't, which of course is fine, but there's like a 2-mana 4/4 that comes in with like 2/2 counters on it. It's like, okay, like, this card is insane as soon as we get these counters off of it.
Yeah, like there's a couple of creatures that like say when this enters, put some number of -1/-1 counters on a creature on target creature you control. And you can either put them on itself and it's still alive and then you have a way to get the counters off later, or you can put them on something else. For instance, there's just one example. This one is one that's likely to see play, I think. Channeler Initiate. It is 1 and a green 3/4, so that's kind of a Tarmogoyf. When it enters the battlefield, put 3 -1/-1 counters on target creature you control. So let's say you played a 1-drop into this. You have a 2-mana 3/4. Like, you trade in your 1-drop for a 2-mana 3/4. But then it has tap, remove a -1/-1 counter from Channeler Initiate, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So it has a way to reward you for putting the counters on itself, but you also have a way that you get rewarded for putting the counters on something else. It's really cool, just the way they're using these counters now.
These are super, super sweet. They're dangerous as well because, I mean, it does make your creature weaker, but the payoff just might outweigh the negative part of it. So, it's something to keep your eye on as you're continuing forward in playing this format. Like, be very careful, because these cards, like the Channeler, this card could be really, really powerful. It also could just be a complete and utter dud.
Yeah.
That's the way -1/-1 counters kind of work. They're either really, really powerful, or they're like, eh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is something interesting, because there are still cards that give +1/+1 counters in Standard. If you didn't know, if a creature has both +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters on it, they cancel out until, there's only one of them left. So let's say something has 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and you have a way to give it 5 -1/-1 counters on it. After your thing resolves, it's going to end up with just a single -1/-1 counter on it and no others. So that is something to keep in mind for stuff that cares about, does this have a +1/+1 or -1/-1 counter on it.
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. Also, it's recommended that you have different set colored dice that represent -1/-1s and +1/+1s. It will help you in your pre-release.
Yes, there actually are. If you didn't know, if you go to the pre-release, you'll get a card that tells you about the 5 trials of the gods, and how Wizards is doing it is, for every one that you finish, you get a special die. The first one that you finish, you get a special Amonkhet spin down to track your life total with, and then every additional trial that you complete after that, you get a special Amonkhet D4, that's a 4-sided die, to track -1/-1 counters. So that's one thing you can use for it. I just use white dice for +1s and then black dice for -1s. It's just easier for me that way.
Yeah, just make sure you're representing it, because it's going to be pretty aggravating when you're like, is that +1/+1 or -1/-1? And you constantly have to ask.
Yep. Now, with that out of the way, all the mechanics behind us, I think that these mechanics are going to create some very interesting things, because we have, a lot of things that care about the graveyard and stuff going, and you have ways to put stuff in your graveyard and stuff like that. And Shadows over Innistrad is still in Standard, so Delirium is still around.
Yep.
It's very interesting how these are going to interact. But we're going to get on into the specific cards that we wanted to talk about. Just our first impressions of these and what we think about them. If we can put them into existing decks, build new decks around them. And the first one we're going to talk about, and this is mostly for Danny. Danny is the modern ad nauseum player. He's excited about Gideon of the Trials. This is the new Gideon Planeswalker.
So, Gideon of the Trials, if you haven't heard about this guy yet, you're living under a rock. He's a 3-mana Planeswalker, double white and 1. He comes with 3 loyalty counters, and of course he gets Gideon. Whether you like that or not, it does really matter. His +1 is until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal. His 0 is he becomes a 4/4 indestructible Gideon Planeswalker, prevent all damage that would be dealt. The typical Gideon thing that he does. Mm-hmm. Normally this would be like the ultimate, like, okay, ally Zendikar is like minus sacrifice him basically and just make an anthem effect or something like that. Mm-hmm. This one is you get an emblem. As long as you control a Gideon Planeswalker, you can't lose the game, your opponent can't win the game. The loyalty removal for this is 0. Why? Nobody knows.
He has 2 0 abilities. He has no minus abilities. Like, the only way that he goes down is if your opponent hits him, which your opponent will want to, because you're gonna get that emblem. It's there forever.
Right. So, as an Nauseam player, I look at a Gideon first and I'm like, whatever. I gotta look at the card. I might see something. It's like +1's whatever. The first 0 is whatever, and the bottom one literally reads Phyrexian Unlife to me.
It really is.
It really is. So yeah, he does die to Abrupt Decay, and I have no way of protecting him. But I do have Slaughter Pact and 2 Pact Negations main board for my deck, and I also do run some number of Simian Spirit Guides. Whether that matters or not, it doesn't matter, because at this point, he's my 4th, 5th, and maybe even my 6th Phyrexian Unlife. Yeah. And this is going to be really, really important versus certain matchups, such as maybe some aggressive ones, as in, non-aggressive matchups, like Control. So, like, I bring this guy in versus Control, they have no way of dealing with it. Beforehand, they were like, oh, I had Disenchant for your Phyrexian Life. well, now you have no way of dealing with Gideon except for like Snapcaster in and block or attack. How do you deal with this as a control player? I don't know. But literally it reads, I have a huge clock, and I'm going to win the game if you can't stop me.
Yeah, for like Grixis control, you have to be that one guy who's running like one Dreadbore over one of the Terminates in the list and stuff like that. So it's going to be tough for the control decks to deal with, definitely. Now, one thing for everyone to keep in mind, if you're not familiar with how modern Ad Nauseam works, it uses Ad Nauseam the card. I mean, we have talked about it before, but it's been a while since we recorded. It uses the card Ad Nauseam, which in this deck basically reads flip over your deck and put it into your hand. Because you lose life for every card that you reveal, but
equal to the CMC.
You run ways to not care about that. One of the ways is Phyrexian Unlife, where you can be at a negative life total and not lose. So getting to the trials, one thing to keep in mind is even though you cannot lose the game while you have Gideon Planeswalker, you can still take damage and lose life. So you may end up at a negative life total, and now you're stuck protecting this Gideon that's on board. You absolutely cannot let him die, otherwise you lose.
Yeah. You could also stick like a Phyrexian Unlife on the field as well. I mean, not like it really matters too terribly much, but if you go like Unlife, then Gideon the trials, now they have to make a choice. It's like, do I attack the Gideon, or do I attack your life total, try to bring you to a negative life total, and then get to an infect life total? It becomes this weird game of chicken. We don't know what's going to happen, but I promise you, once the set comes out on MTGO, I'll be testing between 1 and 4 of these. My range is probably going to be 1 to 2 of them, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain it's going to end up 1 or 2. Now, as far as standard goes with this card, I actually don't think Gideon's going to fit into some of the decks that Gideon Allied Zendikar is being played in. Gideon,
yeah.
The 4-mana Gideon is being played a lot in Mardu vehicles. It's being played in a handful of other decks. Like there's a white-green mid-range deck going around that's been playing it. I don't think Gideon to the Trials fits into those at all. In my opinion,
it's just too slow.
It's too slow. He doesn't have enough of an impact the moment he hits the board. Yes, you can get the emblem, but then your opponent just deals with him super easily with their Scrap Heap Scrounger, or with just like a handful of creatures attacking in. He just doesn't do a whole lot on turn 3. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, you turn 3 Gideon the Trials, and then turn 4 Gideon Allied Zendikar," and it's like, well, the emblem says, as long as you control Gideon, you don't lose. If you keep Gideon Allied Zendikar for like 2 turns, you're already winning the game. You don't need to have that buffer most of the time. So I don't really see that line. I think he's going to fit more into a control shell because of that +1 ability. Until your next turn, prevent all damage a permanent would deal. That shuts down a Heart of Kiran, so you can keep playing Planeswalkers. You can play this Super Friends deck. It shuts down Dynavolt Tower, so your opponent has to activate it on your turn. Like, it just makes it really difficult for people to deal with what you're doing, and then it's like, if there's nothing on, if you've already dealt with everything on board, you just go, okay, make an emblem. Okay, make him a 4/4, hit you. Make him a 4/4, hit you. And that's your win condition.
Yeah, and you know what? The trials, you know what? Maybe once Allied Zendikar's gone, the trials will see more play. But for now, Allied Zendikar is probably one of the most powerful planeswalkers we've had since like Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yeah, like within its own context, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, Allied Zendikar is not as powerful as Jace the Mind Sculptor, but compared to the other cards around it in Standard, yes, I would agree.
Yeah, this card is seeing play ever since it's been printed. Like, it's... I would like Trials to see more play, but for now, Allied Zendikar will be staying forever, whether we like it or not.
Just 6 more months, man. That's all that's left.
God, I don't think I can handle it.
All right, but I do want to move on from Gideon. He is
sure.
a very interesting card to talk about, but we have more cards here. And what I want to talk about, so for those who have listened to the podcast before, you know that we are both combo players.
Yep.
I sometimes end up playing mid-range, but I'm super excited about a possible aggro deck coming out of this set, because we have two really good red cards for aggro decks, in my opinion. We have Flameblade Adept, which I think will be played as a 4 of in aggressive decks. He is a single red for a 1/2 with Menace, and whenever you cycle or discard a card, he gets +1/+0 until end of turn.
Card's real sweet. Like,
I love this card.
If you replace Haste and Menace, you have almost the same exact card as Monastery Swiftspear, but it's really close. Like, but this is the power level of the card. It's almost like the Goblin Guide of Standard, similar to Monastery Swiftspear, where it was like, oh man, this card is just insane. This card is also just insane.
Yeah, where if you're being aggressive at all, you want as many of these as you can possibly fit into your deck. Like, sure, he can't attack on turn 1, whatever, but you just play him turn 1, and then turn 2, you cycle away something that's completely useless, or you Tormenting Voice or Cathartic Reunion. You turn 1 Flamebladed up, turn 2 Cathartic Reunion, you're now attacking with a 3/2 Menace on turn 2. That sounds great. I'm completely on board with that.
Yeah, like, this card is fine. Like, it's perfectly fine. It's a good card. I hope Red Deck Wins comes out of this, because that's the style of deck that I would like to see in Standard right now. It needs to.
Yeah, and I want to be playing a deck with 4 of this, 4 Insolent Neonates, and then 2, maybe 3, of the new Red God. Yes, we do have gods coming back. They're acting a little differently than Theros, but we have a Red God, Hazaret the Fervent. This is 3 in a red for a 5/4 with Indestructible and Haste, and it can't attack or block unless you have 1 or fewer cards in hand.
It's very much a payoff card.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I personally don't like it, but I can see why people think this card is really, really powerful.
Now, to help you get it to be able to attack or block, to get your hand small, it does have 1 last ability. This is 2 in a red, discard a card, deal 2 damage to each opponent. So you can turn any card in your hand into a 3-mana shock.
See, that's the upside of it. It has an enabler. It's able to do what it likes to. But the problem is you're drawing a card per turn. You're a red deck. Sometimes you flood out with lands. It's kind of hard to play more lands. Mm-hmm. You start discarding cards. Like, you can definitely get there. There's Fiery Temper and other madness type of cards available right now in Standard. So this kind of card will push red decks. Whether it will solidify it is a different story.
Mm-hmm. But see, here's the thing. Let's say you're playing a red aggro deck. You start with a hand of 7. Let's say you're on the draw even. Turn 1, you go up to 8. Play a land, play a 1-drop. You're down to 6 cards in hand. Turn 2, draw a card, play a land, play a dude. You're at 5 cards. Turn 3, you're down to 4 cards. Turn 4, you're down to 3 cards when you play Hazaret, and then the next turn you just go discard this, cast this spell, and now Hazaret can attack on turn 5. That seems fine.
Yeah, it's like it's fine.
And that's if all you're doing is curving out. Let's say that you played multiple 1-drops on turn 2 or on turn 3. You could potentially be attacking with Hazaret on turn 4.
Yeah, so I definitely would like to see this card working out.
Oh, yeah.
We will see.
Yeah, I think that its biggest role in an aggro deck would be flood protection. You can turn your excess lands into damage, and in an aggro deck, you're dumping your hand very fast anyways. Should be very easy to turn this on.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing we want to talk about, this is another red card. This is a reprint that a lot of people have missed. This is Fling. This is an instant for 1 in a red. As an additional cost to cast Fling, sacrifice a creature, and it deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. So, people have really wanted this card because there are 2 deck archetypes that are probably going to want this. One of them is the oh-so-popular Electrostatic Pummeler deck. You boost Pummeler's power up and up and up and up, and then you just fling it at your opponent. You don't even have to attack anymore. You just fling it.
Yep, Fling is fantastic. I'm very, very excited to see that.
Yeah. Now, the other deck that could be really cool with this, everyone's been playing around with the Metalwork Colossus decks. Imagine, if you will, playing your 0-mana 10/10 and then flinging it, and then doing it again.
Yep, so you get 2 of them on the field, you got 4 mana, you can fling for 20 damage. Woo!
Yeah, and that's not even considering attacking with them. let's say you attack with them, and then you fling them. That sounds great.
Yep, it's just dumb.
And then you just get the Colossi back by sacrificing your artifacts. This deck sounds so much fun.
Yeah, it's going to be really sweet. I'm very excited for it because it's already been a blue-red Colossus deck already, so I'm hoping that the deck keeps going forward.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple people in our area. We've got some people who are pretty excited for this possibility of Fling Colossus. I'm definitely waiting to see what happens there. Next card we have. This is a really cool card. A lot of Commander players are excited about this. And depending on how things go, people may try and build something in Standard around this. I don't know if it'll be any good, but definitely an interesting card. As Anointed Procession, it is 3 and a white for an enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead.
Super, super sweet. Works with a bomb, other token creatures. Gideon. Man.
Yeah.
Gideon.
This is literally a white color-shifted version of Parallel Lives, which is a slightly worse Doubling Season. Which Doubling Season is is a centerpiece of some of the most broken combos in Commander. So, kind of tells you a little bit of the legacy this card has to live up to, and it's not really, that much of a stretch for this card.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in Standard and in Limited with Amonkhet, you've got remember Embalm makes tokens. You've got a couple other ways to make tokens, like you could be playing a zombie tribal deck and be making zombie tokens. We also still have clues in Standard, and clues are tokens. So, play Tireless Tracker and this, and now you're getting 2 clues for every land, stuff like that.
Yep, exactly. And that's powerful on its own, is like you're able to make with like a green-white version, maybe with like Tireless Tracker and things like that, and have clues. It could be really, really insane.
Yeah, definitely really cool. This card is definitely sink or swim, so we'll have to keep our eyes on this. I don't think it's going to do much, but it's always possible with an effect as powerful as this.
Hey man, crazier things have happened.
Crazier things have happened. Talking about crazy, we have our first Planeswalker with X in the mana cost. We have Nissa, Steward of Elements.
This card is sweet.
This card is awesome. It is X green-blue for a Nissa with X loyalty counters. So just let that sink in for a little bit. You play this on turn 3, she starts at 1 loyalty. Turn 4, starts at 2 loyalty. Let's say you're ramping. You can have her enter with as many loyalty counters as you want, as long as you have mana. This is great. Already, I love this card. Now on to her abilities. Her +2, Scry 2. Beautiful, elegant, great plus ability. Then she has 0. Look at the top card of your library. If it's a land or a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of loyalty counters on Nissa, you may put that card onto the battlefield. So it's ramp, it's cheat creatures into play, and it works very well with her plus ability. That seems good already. Then her ultimate is -6. Now keep in mind, you could play her for X = 6 and do this right away. So it says untap up to 2 target lands you control. They become 5/5 elemental creatures with flying and haste until end of turn. They are still lands.
It's great.
And 8 mana hit you for 10 in a blue-green deck. Yay.
Yep.
So, now, there are downsides to Nissa, definitely. She has no way to protect herself unless that 0 hits a creature that can block for her. So that is definitely a downside.
That is true. It's a really big downside. It becomes she can't protect herself at all, which really, really is the only negative to this card. Honestly, everything else is super sweet.
Yeah, and I mean that does mean that in a world in Standard, in a world of Heart of Kirans and Scrap Heap Scroungers and lots of aggressive creatures that can hit you pretty early on, she may not make it, but that ultimate ability And, if you've played a few things that can protect her, and then you drop her, could just be enough.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, this is a card where we're going to have to watch it and watch what decks come out to build around it from there. Because there are good cards for it and everything like that. There is ramping. At the same time, though, you don't want to just be as this your only win con.
Yeah, it's not good as a sole win con, but it's definitely a good support card for your win condition. I think one thing that's kind of a problem with this card is that it's existing in the same standards as Etherworks Marvel, which is just kind of a better version of her Zero.
Yeah.
So that's a point against her, definitely. But that ultimate makes her something to consider, definitely.
Definitely. Like, she's definitely not off the block when you look at her. See, the thing about Planeswalkers is it's so difficult to evaluate because in a vacuum, they're all stupid powerful. All of them are. They're all stupid powerful in their own ways, except for Tibble. But we don't talk about Tibble because that's not a Planeswalker. Besides that, really, all Planeswalkers in a vacuum are just like this insane, super powerful card. Now, let's put it in the real world. Let's talk about, like, Legacy for a quick second. Let's look at it in a Sultai control deck. 3 mana, you put her down, you activate her, you scry 2, which is great. Alright, next turn I brainstorm, I scry 2, push the 2 bad cards away, fantastic. Do I have a way of protecting her? Maybe not. She's a forcible target? Yeah. It's this weird, and she's also dies to Abrupt Decay, which is a big deal, because you're like, mana sink, go, Abrupt Decay, dang.
Yeah, but then you can have those situations where you just play Nissa, scry 2, she survived, great, I'm gonna 0, put Leovold into play for free, stuff like that. Like,
totally.
There's definitely a lot of upside to her, but it's just within the context, it might be a little tough to get her to work. So we'll see how this goes. I will say, I'm being completely honest, my excitement for the card when I was reading it, that is 100% real. You gotta temper that with reality sometimes. She is a very, very sweet card. I really want this card to see play, but I really don't think it will, sadly.
Yeah. And same with some of the gods. You just don't know until it starts seeing play. It might, but just like some of these cards are just sideboard cards. We won't know unless we start testing them. And it's hard to test when the cards aren't legal.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't be trying. I would definitely be trying brews with Nissa, Teamer Ramp, stuff like that. We'll get into that in future episodes, but that is a very interesting Planeswalker.
Super sweet. Very excited. I hope it does well. I hope it's not just like this $5 mythic that a lot of Planeswalkers turn out to be.
Yeah. Now, moving on, we have 2 interesting cards here that Danny's looking forward to, definitely, because he insisted I put these on the list. We have 2 zombie tribal cards.
Zombies are back, and it's great and exciting. Zombies!
Yes, zombies are back. So these are both black cards. We first have Lord of the Accursed. This is 2 and a black for a 2/3 zombie. It reads, other zombies you control get +1/+1, and 1 and a black, and tap it. All zombies gain menace until end of turn.
That is super powerful. Really powerful.
That is one way to close out the game.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, this card is insane.
Yeah, really sweet. It's definitely a very interesting zombie lord. It definitely, lends itself to, you want to flood the board with zombie tokens and then just activate him and send them all in.
Exactly. And don't forget that in Bomb reads, this creature becomes a zombie creature type alongside of other types.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at maybe black-white zombies now, maybe black-white zombies in Standard. Who knows? This card's really sweet. You're really sweet. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I mean, we did mention Anointed Procession. You get double tokens. You get that with Embalm. You play this guy and send it all in. It's possible. But
yes.
The next one, to be completely honest, I think this one has a higher chance of seeing play. Just because it's a 3 mana 5/4. We'll just start off with that. It is 2 and a black for a 5/4 with Menace. And when it enters the battlefield, put 2 -1/-1 counters on target creature you control. So sometimes it's just a 3/2 Menace for 3, which is okay, not great. But other times it's a 5/4 Menace for 3 that you traded in one of your old creatures for.
Yep, like a zombie token, because it's a 2/2.
Yeah, a zombie token. Or there's actually, I don't have it up right now, but there's a 1/1 that when it dies, it creates a zombie. So put the counters on that, you get a zombie, that guy dies, who cares? You have a 5/4 with Menace. This is great.
Sweet.
Then he also has one more line. Whenever another zombie you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So, good luck casting a Wrath against this deck.
Yeah, there could be... This is the kind of card that pushes zombie decks into the possible play of Standard. Because, technically speaking, we do have Shadows of Innistrad and Elder's Moon available. So we have zombies from that set as well. I mean, really, there's some sweet cards out there. This pushes this deck to make it exist.
Yeah. Now, and the thing is, this deck could totally exist in aggro decks that are not zombie decks. Like, the Flameblade Adept deck I was talking about played red-black through this guy in. Turn 1, Flameblade Adept. Turn 2, discard a few cards, hit you. Turn 3, hit you. And then Plague Belcher, sack my Flameblade Adept. I have a 5/4 Menace now. You just upgraded your 1-drop. Sounds great.
It's fantastic. I love it. I think this card is super sweet. If anything, EDH players, you're welcome. More Zombie Tribal is great.
More Zombie Tribal is great. Definitely really cool for all those Grimgrin Corpseborn players.
Yeah.
That's just the first zombie commander that came to mind. I know there's plenty more.
Oh, for sure.
But we have also a few cards that are going to maybe bring out some tier 2 or 3 modern decks. Some really cool ones. First up, we have for the Restore Balance deck. So, Restore Balance, I believe we may have talked about this before. In case we haven't, Restore Balance is a sorcery with Suspend 6 for a white. It has no mana cost of its own, so you can't actually cast it from your hand. You're supposed to suspend it. And it reads, each player chooses a number of lands he or she controls equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Then you do the same for creatures and cards in hand. So everyone goes down to the lowest number of lands, creatures, and cards in hand. Normally you achieve this by cascading into it, but we have a new card that may bring Restore Balance into the forefront of Modern. It may not. This is As Foretold. 2 and a blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of time counters on As Foretold. Now, it has been confirmed by Wizards that yes, you can cast the cycle of suspend cards with no mana cost off of As Foretold.
Sweet.
Seems great. So this is another way to cast Restore Balance, which Restore Balance is usually used as a board wipe that does not kill your Planeswalkers, because you may be playing a Planeswalker killing version with big Planeswalkers, like getting Knives Zendikar or Elspeth Sun's Champion, or whatever kill condition you would like that's a Planeswalker, because Restore Balance doesn't hit those. Or you may be playing a version with Greater Gargadon, which just comes in after you've wiped the board and hits them for 9.
Yeah, and also you sacrifice all your permanents, so that way they sacrifice all their permanents, and then you have a 9/7.
Yes. Now, As Foretold does have its weaknesses. It is vulnerable to Abrupt Decay. It's vulnerable to Disenchant and Wear and Tear, and all sorts of other things. But it is really cool because Restore Balance has always had a problem of when it actually draws the Restore Balance. It's been a little tough to cast it out of your hand.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, this is sweet. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, definitely very cool. Next up, we have Curator of Mysteries for Living End. Danny actually brought this one up to me. I didn't think of it, and this is really cool. Danny, if you want to read the card, go for it.
Yeah, Curator of Mysteries is a really sweet Sphinx, actually. It's a double blue 2 for a 4/4 flyer. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, scry 1, and it has cycling 1 blue. That's it. So it's just cycle it for 1 mana, 1 blue mana, and that's what Living End does, right? Like, they just cycle all their cards, bring them all back, kill you.
Yeah, this could definitely slot into Living End. You know, you play some more blue. There's already been builds playing Architects of Will as one of its cyclers, but you know, this is another cycler that, you know, if it comes out from Living End, or if you end up in a really grindy matchup and you have to just play it as a 4/4, it's pretty good. I mean, while it's on board, it dodges Abrupt Decay, so it's a fairly decent blocker and attacker just by itself. And then you scry 1, so if anything triggers when you cycle, that trigger resolves before you draw the card. So you cycle something, you get your scry trigger. Oh, that's a Living End? Bottom that, I don't want to draw it, and then you draw the next card. So
yeah. And the problem with Living End players is they've never had any deck manipulation before, really. This card is technically deck manipulation, because now you do have a way of, like, oh, okay, you know, one Living End resolved, like, I got this on the field now, or I just hard cast it for 4 mana, which is whatever, or, like, 3 mana because I run Simian Spirit Guide too. And then you start cycling your cards, you're like, okay, I'm going to start scrying away the bad cards, so that way I can look at the better cards, and it's like, oh, well, Living End in my hand is literally the worst card I could have.
Yeah.
So it's something to keep your eye on, honestly.
Yeah, this is a very interesting card. We're going to see how this goes. Definitely. I'll be playing around with it. I haven't really built Living End before, but we'll see if I can come up with something that looks, you know, like it might work with this card. Now, last deck I want to talk about, this is another Modern deck that I have been working on for months and months and months, and I've been trying so hard to make it work. Mono Red Stompy in Modern with Hazoret. We've already talked about Hazoret, that's the Red God. So Mono Red Stompy in Legacy, usually its main way of winning is you lock out your opponent with Chalice of the Void and Trinisphere and maybe some Thorn of Amethyst in the sideboard, and then you just kill them with like 5 mana red things.
Yeah, like Sinprodder and Chandra and things like that.
Yeah, and Cause of the Hammer and stuff. Now the thing is, pretty much all of the win conditions in Mono Red Stompy from Legacy are Modern legal cards. The only cards that are not Modern legal in that deck, for the most part, are like
Sneak Attack.
Yeah, Sneak Attack, which sees play in a few of the Mono Red Stompy lists, and the Soul Lands. Those are lands that tap for 2 mana by themselves. That would be your Ancient Tombs and your City of Traders. And that's always been the problem with Mono Red Stompy in Modern, is you don't have a way to secure the turn 1 Chalice on 1, or the turn 1 or turn 2 Blood Moon or Trinisphere. It's always been really tough for Modern to do it, because you have to have kind of the perfect hand. Most of the time you'll either be using Simian Spirit Guides, or you'll have Gemstone Caverns, which if you're on the draw, you can exile a card from your hand to have Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield at the beginning of the game with a luck counter on it, and while it has a luck counter, taps for any color. So that's another way to like get Chalice on 1 on turn 1. So that's already on the battlefield, and then you get your land drop and play Chalice.
Yep.
But the thing is, when Mono Red Stompy can do that in Modern, it's super strong. Turn 1, turn 2, Blood Moon is great. I mean, most times a Modern version tries to do that by using, you know, Pyretic Ritual or Desperate Ritual to power out these 3 drops earlier. Now the thing is, because it's using the rituals and it's, you know, pitching Spirit Guides and stuff like that, Hazoret gets turned on very, very easily, because very often in Mono Red Stompy, even in Legacy Stompy, you end up with 2-0 cards in your hand quite often.
Yeah, it's very true.
So we'll have to see how this works. I've been playing around with it, trying to see if it'll work. I still think it might not, but it's definitely something I really want to explore, because I really, really, really want this deck to work in Modern. I think it would be sweet.
Would be sweet. It's very excited to see if it will. We'll try it out and see how it works.
Yeah, and it's possible that Koth of the Hammer is just better at 4 mana, but I want to try it with Hazoret. I think he's sweet. Great way to, you know, deal with flooding, all that. Now, we do want to talk about a few cards that should shake up the standard metagame, because we have had... standard has kind of been well established at this point. You've basically got 3 to 4 decks in standard that are
more like
good.
2.5.
More like 2.5. The two premier decks definitely are Mardu Vehicles, using Heart of Kiran and Scrap Heap Scrounger to beat your face in. And then we have the Saheeli Feldar Guardian combo, and there's variations on that. You've got just the Jeskai Saheeli combo. You've got the 4-color version playing Oath of Nissas, which I think is decidedly stronger, but they do both exist.
Yep.
Then you've got kind of your tier 1.5 decks, would be like your Etherworks Marvel, which can, cast Ulamogs on turn 4. That is definitely a thing. And you've also got the black-green Winding Constrictor decks, playing Winding Constrictor with Rishkar and Walking Ballistas and Verdus Gearhulks, and you've got some variations on that, like playing Grim Flayers or not playing Grim Flayers, caring about Delirium or not. So those are kind of the decks in standard. But we're going to have a couple cards coming in that may shake things up, a few reprints, a few new cards. First up, we have something that could work very well against Mardu Vehicles, and this is Magma Spray. This is a nice reprint.
Yeah, much needed.
Yeah, it is a single red for an instant. Magma Spray deals 2 damage to target creature. If it would die, exile it instead.
Honestly, it's a strictly better shock now because, yeah, we do have shock available to us, but really we don't care because we'd rather just exile their Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Yeah, like the upside of shock is, yes, you can kill a Saheeli right in the middle of the Saheeli Cat combo, but Magma Spray is just so much better because of being able to just permanently get rid of Scrap Heap Scroungers. You can permanently get rid of so many things with Magma Spray. Really good card. It was great the first time it came around. It's going to be great this time, I can tell you that right now. Next up, we have a really interesting card here that hates on both of the top decks, so that's really cool. This is Manglehorn. It is 2 and a green for a 2/2 beast. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact, and artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. So
sweet.
Yeah, it's sweet. So when it enters, kill that Heart of Kiran. Or, if you're against Cat combo, which doesn't play very many artifacts, you just don't kill anything. But Saheeli combo has to deal with the Manglehorn first because the copies of Feldar Guardian that it makes are artifact creatures. So they enter the battlefield tapped.
Love it.
So this can buy you a turn against Saheeli combo very often.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's a 3-mana. It's a Grey Ogre. Who cares? It has a great effect. I think this card will definitely see... If we see green decks coming to the forefront a bit more, this card will definitely see play, probably main deck, just to be able to win game 1 against Vehicles and Cat combo a few times.
Yeah, which is fine. It's great, honestly. We really need more hate cards for these horrific decks that are in standard.
Yeah. Now, we have here 3 cards that we are interested in for a specific deck archetype we have not seen in a long time. Well, we kind of saw some time ago before the ban wave that shook up standard, but we have 3 cards that would be great in a blue or blue-white control or tempo deck. We have Failure to Comply, which is one of the Aftermath cards. So the failure side is 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target spell to its owner's hand. Kind of a bad remand.
Yep.
And then the other half is Comply. This is the Aftermath half. It is a sorcery for a single white. Choose a card name. Until your next turn, your opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name. So one way to view this card is it's a remand that always draws you a very, very narrow silence.
It's sorcery, too.
Yeah, it's a sorcery. That's why it's a very narrow, kind of bad silence. The thing is, this card, it'll buy you 2 turns against a combo deck. it'll buy you 2 turns against like any other deck. Let's say your opponent's on the Fling Colossus deck, you just got rid of a Fling pretty easily. Like you use up a lot of your opponent's resources with this. So that is one upside to the card.
That's true.
Yeah, now there are downsides. The fact that there are better 2-mana spells in blue. There's a better counterspell we're going to get to in just a moment. There's better counterspells, period, at 3 mana that you could be playing instead. But this is an interesting tempo play that you could be playing, hold this up on turn 2, and then on your turn 3, comply the card, and then play it, and then like hold up another 2 mana for another counterspell or something. Or hold it, or just play a 2-drop. Like, it's definitely stuff you can do.
Yeah, I definitely like it. It's super sweet.
But next we have another 2-mana counterspell, and this one's a really good one. This is Essence Scatter. 1 in a blue, instant, counter target creature spell.
Super sweet, much needed. Don't know why it's not in like standard forever. Like, it's just necessary.
Mm-hmm. Now, the downside of Essence Scatter is, yes, it does not counter Heart of Kirin, it does not counter Saheeli, but it's going to counter a Verdurous Gearhulk. It's going to counter a Felidar Guardian. It's going to counter a Scrapheap Scrounger, a Walking Ballista. Like, there's a lot of very relevant cards that it counters. So
it's great.
I really like that this is back. I really like that this is back. It's going to bring tempo and control decks a little bit more forward.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that.
Now, the last of these cards for this blue or blue-white deck that we have is called Censor. And this is 1 in a blue for an instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1, and has cycling for a single blue mana.
It's awesome. Like, this is basically a form of Force Spike and or Daze, if you want to look in that fashion. And then when it becomes late game, you're just like, oh, well, I don't need this card anymore. I guess I'll just draw an extra card. Like, yeah. People that diss on this card are really, really narrow-minded, honestly.
The thing is, people compare it too much to Miscalculation, which was a card that came out in Urza's Legacy way back in the day. This is about when cycling first came out. And Miscalculation was 1 in the blue for an instant, counter unless its controller pays 2 with cycling 2. So, compared to Miscalculation, it is worse because the amount they have to pay is less. But yeah. Why are we comparing this to Miscalculation when Miscalculation is not in standard at the same time as this card? It's kind of an irrelevant conversation to be having. Yes, it is worse than Miscalculation. Let's get over it. Because I could also say, well, the Detective Jace is worse than Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yeah, like, it's not fair. Like, you can't compare apples to oranges, but at the end of the day, if you look at this as a Force Spike that technically could draw you a card, that's really good.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is, if you've been watching Standard, every single deck in Standard wants to curve out. They want to play 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and in some cases 5-drop. This card stops that in its tracks. You go turn 1, dual land, turn 2, island, go. Your opponent now has to sit there and scratch their head and be like, do they have it? And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then the thing is, if you do have it, you just ruin their curve. If you don't have it, you just go, okay, whatever. Turn 3, land, go. I now have Void Shatter up.
Sweet. Love it. It's great.
Like, that's why I love this card. It's going to ruin your opponent's turn after your turn 2. And even just the threat of having it could do it. So I think that this card's going to see... If we see a blue deck, this card will be in that as, I'm going to say, a 3 or 4 of.
Oh yeah, like, this card is fantastic. And the best part is you can sideboard it out for your negates.
Exactly. You just take it out, sideboarding your negates or your essence scatters, just kind of switch them around. It's a slot that you can just play with. Now, the last card we want to talk about for Standard, this is another way to stop those Scrapheap Scroungers. It's a Scarab Feast. It's a single black for an instant. Exile up to 3 target cards from a single graveyard with cycling for a single black.
Card is so good, it's not even funny.
It's so good. You can exile Scrap Heap Scroungers. You can turn off Delirium. It's great. And then if you're in a matchup where that doesn't matter, let's say you're playing against the Saheeli combo deck that doesn't care about its graveyard, just cycle it away.
Yeah, this card is actually mainboard playable because it's 1 black at instant speed, and they're like, oh, I have Delirium. So it's like, all right, let's say they have Grimflayer. They're like, go to attacks. I have a 4/4. Bash. You're like, blocks before damage, Scare Feast, reduce your Delirium to nothing. And they're like, oh, I have a 2/2 now with Trample. That's a 4/4. Dang.
Yeah, exactly. I think this card will definitely see, 2 of 3 of play in any deck that's playing black. And the thing is, it in the matchups where you don't need it, that's basically 3 slots of your deck that have been replaced with draw a card.
Exactly.
Right.
And
That's
that's sweet.
Fun. Yeah, and that's why people love cycling, because it's like, oh, this card is bad now. Let me just throw it away for a new one.
Yeah.
Really good. So that about wraps up, our first look at Amonkhet. I know we covered a lot of cards there, but there's a lot of cards we're excited about. We're going to get into a few more of them next week once the full spoiler is up. But before we go, we have a nice little treat for you guys. I did say at the beginning that we are going to be featuring more brews. And I have a really cool one here for you guys. I'm going to be posting a link in the description. And this is my personal build of modern eggs.
It's sweet.
Yeah, it's sweet. Danny and I have been working on this for a while. We've been talking back and forth for a long time. I've taken this to a few modern events. We actually had a local player who he has a reputation for borrowing other people's decks instead of actually having one of his own. I gave him 5 minutes of coaching with this deck, and he won a 12-man event. It was great. But eggs, I know that we've spoken about this before because we're both combo players, but just to recap, how eggs works is it uses artifacts that we will refer to as eggs for further on that have an effect when you sacrifice them, usually drawing you a card. And then it uses Krark Clan Ironworks, a 4-mana artifact that lets you sacrifice an artifact to add 2 to your mana pool. And Faith's Reward, 3 and a white instant. Return to the battlefield all permanents in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So you use Krark Clan Ironworks, generate a whole bunch of mana, cast a Faith's Reward, get them all back, and just rinse and repeat. There's a couple different ways to do this.
Yeah, the problem is online, this is like a 5-minute, 6-minute combo.
It's one of the worst decks to play online, especially if your opponent, like, you've demonstrated that you have the kill, and your opponent's like, nah, keep going.
Yeah,
it's the worst.
I'll have 6, I'm going to walk away. You have to represent it. And it's really, it's actually just flat out rude. Besides that, it's a really, really powerful deck that got hit by a ban a long time back, and it's actually just it's slowly been creeping back up. But now cards like Walking Ballista and Scrap Trawler have really pushed this card, and Inventor's Fair. These 3 cards have pushed this deck back into the format.
Yeah, and the great thing is, my deck, each of those is just as a one-of, but that's all it needs sometimes.
Yeah.
So the card that got banned was Second Sunrise, which is basically Face Reward for 3 mana, which made the deck a little bit too consistent for Wizards to be comfortable with it existing. Not because it was so powerful. It was kind of powerful, but mostly because 3-game matches would take upwards of an hour to complete. Because the loop at the time was you would sacrifice a Pyrite Spellbomb to deal 2 to them, and then you would have Conjurer's Bauble to put the Face Reward back on the bottom of your graveyard, and then you would have to draw through your deck to get to the Face Reward again, but make sure you don't draw too many cards to mill yourself out. Then you do the Pyrite Spellbomb again, and you just do this over and over and over. And it took forever. Thankfully, we got a card back in Return to Ravnica that fixes this problem. That is Codex Shredder. This card has seen a lot of play in Lantern Control. It's a single mana for an artifact. You can tap it to mill someone for 1, but the reason you're playing this in eggs is 5 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, return target card from your graveyard to your hand.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's great. So in eggs, what you do is, if you can generate 8 and a white in mana, you just tell your opponent, I'm going to demonstrate a loop now and show them I'm going to sacrifice all of this to Krark Clan Ironworks, activate Codex Shredder to return Face Reward to my hand, cast Face Reward. I'm going to just keep doing this. I'm going to sacrifice these things extra to draw cards. Okay, I'm going to take those out. Now I'm going to sacrifice these things extra to just generate mana. Like, this is the loop, and it makes the deck so much faster. Like, I've been able to kill someone in 5 minutes with this deck as opposed to 15.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen. Like, I was there for that first tournament that you went to with this deck, and it was impressive. It was really cool.
It's really great. Now, as we said, the new cards, we've got Inventor's Fair. This card is really good for finding just that last piece. Usually Eggs finds the pieces for the combo, the Crocodile Ironworks, and any of the eggs it needs, maybe a Lotus Bloom with Reshape, which is X blue sorcery. As an additional cost, sacrifice an artifact. Then you search your library for an artifact when converting it cost X or less and put it into play. So you can cast this for 0 and find a Lotus Bloom. You can cast it for 4 and find a Crocodile Ironworks. Whatever you need. Inventor's Fair is another way of finding the card you need. So the relevant part of Inventor's Fair is 4 mana, tap, sacrifice Inventor's Fair, search your library for an artifact, reveal it, put it into your hand, and you can only activate if you control 3 or more artifacts. Eggs plays 4 Darksteel Citadels, and my version plays 23 other artifacts. I will have 3 artifacts on board, unless you Shatterstormed me.
Yep.
In which case I am very sad.
Yes.
But Inventor's Fair lets you find the Crocodile Ironworks, which is the most important part to let you go off.
Yeah.
And then during the combo, let's say you ran out of card draw, you can use Inventor's Fair to just find the last thing you need. Scrap Trawler. This one is 3 mana for a 3/2 artifact creature. When Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact in your graveyard with less converted mana cost. So a 3-drop went to your graveyard, you grab a 2-drop out. A 2-drop went to your graveyard, you grab a 1-drop out. I've won on turn 3 with this card because you play it on turn 2 because this deck does play Mox Opals, and then turn 3 you play a Crocodile Ironworks and you just looping cards. You go, sacrifice my Mox Opal to KCI, get 2 mana. Now I'm going to sacrifice my Chromatic Star, Scrap Trawler trigger, return Mox Opal to hand, replay Mox Opal, float a colored mana, sacrifice the Mox Opal, sacrifice another 1-drop artifact, get the Mox Opal back, and you just generate so much mana off of only like 3 or 4 cards and draw a whole bunch of cards at the same time. It's kind of gross.
It's really, really sweet. If you ever have an opportunity to actually see this deck go off, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. And then, as you mentioned, Walking Ballista. Now, my version of the deck does play the classic Pyrite Spellbomb, because with Pyrite Spellbomb, Codex Shredder, and Face Reward, you have a way to kill someone at instant speed if you desperately need to, try to go off, and you get lucky, you can kill someone at instant speed. Mm-hmm. But usually this deck will win by casting Walking Ballista. So, after you've looped your Face Reward and Codex Shredder a few times, you have an arbitrary amount of mana. I usually like to say 1 billion. I now cast a Walking Ballista that has 500 million power. I will now shoot it all at you.
It's awesome. The best part is you can actually just hold priority. So what you can do is you can go activate the Ballista holding priority. Activate, but take a counter off holding priority, and then shoot 19 more at you. So that way you can't respond.
Yeah, you can't like Frozen Grip it, and then it's like, oh, well, there's lethal is still on the stack, or anything like that. Now, the main reason I have Walking Ballista as a win condition in this deck. Now, as a zero mana artifact, is extremely easy to grab this in this deck. I can reshape for it just by reshaping something away for 0, and it just goes to my graveyard. I get it back with Scrap Trawler or some other way. The reason why I use this as a win condition in my deck is because there's a lot of times in Eggs where you kind of go half off. You don't generate enough mana, or you don't find the loop, so you're kind of left sitting there with like 12 mana in your pool and nothing to do with it. Walking Ballista lets you make a 6/6, which in some matchups that just wins you the game.
Yeah, I was gonna say in some matchups like Affinity and things like that, a 6/6 just wipes their board. Like, you just can't lose.
Yeah, against Affinity, Walking Ballista is disgusting because, they dump their hand, they've played their Ornithopters and their Memnites and their Signal Pests and their Etch Champion, who cares? You just play like a 5/5 Walking Ballista and you just slowly gun down their entire board. I don't care that your Etch Champion's protection from all colors. Walking Ballista is colorless. It's great.
It's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. And against Infect, it's really good too, because you just go, put 1 damage on the stack, and they go, pump spell, put 1 damage on the stack, pump spell, put 1 damage on the stack.
Yeah, it's so hard for them to it's so hard for the Ballista to just be killed at that point. They're just like, what do I do? I can't stop this thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's one other new card that we haven't mentioned yet that's really great for this deck, and that is Whir of Invention. This is a card that a lot of people were very excited about for Other Revolt. Hasn't really seen any play in Standard, hasn't really seen any play anywhere yet, but I've been playing in this deck and I love it. It's basically an instant speed reshape. It's X blue 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 instant speed with improvise, so you can tap artifacts to add to it to pay for mana, and then you search your library for an artifact with converted mana cost X or less, put it into play, then shuffle your library. So it's like a more expensive reshape that is instant speed, and you don't have to sacrifice an artifact.
Yeah, it's blue Quarter Calling, for those that just need a TLDR.
Yeah, for those of you who know Court of Calling, this is blue Court of Calling for artifacts. The great thing about this is there's a lot of great ways you can use it. Eggs does play Lotus Blooms, so let's say your Lotus Bloom comes off the stack. Your opponent tries to screw you up by saying, on your upkeep after Lotus Bloom resolves, Ancient Grudge it. You just go, in response, I'll sacrifice my Lotus Bloom, cast Whir of Invention for 0, get a new one.
It's awesome.
It's great. You can also Whir of Invention on your opponent's end step for 4 to grab your Kirkland Ironworks, which you can do off of your 3 lands because you have 4 artifacts out. Like, it works extremely well in this deck. Now I'm playing a 3 reshape, 2 Whir split. From what I've been reading and I've been talking with other people who play eggs, this is kind of the standard for the decks that are playing Whir of Invention. Now, the spicy stuff in this list that I have not seen in other decks, we have 3 copies of Thirst for Knowledge, which great card in Legacy, amazing card in Cube drafts, has not seen much play in Modern. This is 2 and a blue for an instant. You draw 3 cards, and then you discard 2 unless you discard an artifact.
It's so good. It's insane. I love this card.
It's a draw 3, and the thing is, I can get my artifacts back from the graveyard. The replacement for Second Sunrise was Open the Vaults, which doesn't care when the artifacts went to the graveyard, they just come back. So that's basically what Open the Vaults does in this deck. Now, this build of eggs is playing 4 Lotus Blooms. Sometimes you draw a Lotus Bloom on turn 2. You really don't want it, so you just Thirst for Knowledge, throw it into the graveyard. Later on in the game, you can open the vaults and you get it back. It's really good that way. And then the main reason I like Thirst for Knowledge in this deck is that, in my opinion, Eggs has always had a problem of just not being able to dig far enough sometimes. A lot of decks are playing Thoughtcast for it. I don't really like Thoughtcast just because sometimes it's a little clunky. Sometimes it's not incredibly good early. You kind of have to be playing it instead of Serum Visions in the deck, which I just like Serum Visions for setting up your draws a little bit too much. So I'm opting to play 3 Serum Visions, 3 Thirst for Knowledge, just, that way I have a good split of draw power with card selection, and I get to take advantage of when I draw my Lotus Blooms. But then the last card that I have on my list, and this, I took a little bit of inspiration from you, Danny, and we talked about this for a while before I went ahead and put that in the list.
Flattered.
This is 3 copies of Pact of Negation.
My favorite card.
Pact of Negations. This is an all-star in Ad Nauseam. I wanted to try it out in Eggs, and I've been happy with it. So it's 0 mana for an instant, counter target spell. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. So in Ad Nauseam, it's a lot easier to pay that cost and use Pact of Negation just for value counter spell. Although usually you're using Pact of Negation during the combo to protect it. In eggs, you're mostly using it just to protect the combo. You don't get access to mana as easily as ad nauseam without already being in the combo. You usually are casting Path of Negation only during the combo turn that you're killing them. But it gives you a lot of play against the control decks. It allows you to play the long game against other combo decks if you end up in that seat, which can happen from time to time. This is also a reason why I'm playing the 1 Pyrite Spellbomb for the instant speed kill, because sometimes you really, really have to Pact of Negation something on your opponent's turn so you can survive, and then try to go off during your upkeep.
Mm-hmm.
Like
it's the same thing as ad nauseam. Like, you literally need that Pact of Negation because people are like, oh, I'll just hold up a counterspell, and it's the only thing that's going to stop you. It's like, no, I have a 0-mana counterspell, and I'm going to proceed to kill you now. Sorry.
Yep. So, and I haven't done it in an actual game, but I have done it in testing where I was like, Pact of Negation your thing on my upkeep, start trying to go off with Thirst for Knowledge and everything. I'm going to Word Invention for my Pyrite Spellbomb, and now I'm going to go off.
Yeah, and you can do it instant speed, which is great.
And that's another reason why Word Invention is great for the deck. But, this is a very fun combo deck. If you like, if you like solving puzzles in Magic, this is a deck that you might be interested in. Just because a lot of times you have to look at your opening hand and go like, how close am I to the turn 4, or anything like that. And occasionally you get lucky and you can go and you can attempt to do the turn 3 kill. Happens only every so often, but just enough with this build that sometimes you gotta look for it.
Yeah, and you know what though? Like, that's the same thing with ad nauseam. Like, ad nauseam does the same thing where you're looking for the pieces of the puzzle, and if you can put it together, there's nothing that can stop you. Mm-hmm. Literally, the decks that we play, both me and Carl are playing, are two versions of the same thing that are just like unstoppable forces in Modern. There's a handful of cards and a handful of decks that do really, really well against us, and that's why we're not top tier decks.
Yeah. Like,
outside of that, our decks are, I consider, some of the most powerful 75 cards in Modern.
They are very powerful combo decks that, if you don't have a way to interact with it before the kill turn, there's really nothing you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And the worst part is sometimes you just go silence. Like, some decks run silence. It's like, oh, well, now I can't do anything. It's like, yeah, duh.
Yeah. Currently my sideboard doesn't have it, but I've debated putting it back in, here and there. It's a great way to just, solidly glue your victory down. Just be like, silence you. It's nothing you can do. Just sit there and watch. But yeah, this has kind of been my favorite build of eggs. I've been going through iterations and stuff. I've been trying to come up with a fancy name for it. I think I'm going to call it Milk and Eggs because you got thirst for knowledge. You're a little thirsty with your eggs. You might want some milk on the side,
It's awesome. Like, there's some sweet stuff, like it's second brunch, things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great names for eggs variants. So, try this deck out if you like solving puzzles in Magic. You're gonna have a lot of fun. Pro tip: if you do decide to pick up this deck, almost any hand that contains Darksteel Citadel, Mox Opal, and a Chromatic Star is a keep. Almost.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Don't always keep it, but almost every card that starts, almost every hand where your turn 1 starts like that is great. But yeah, thanks for listening to us. Again, this is kind of the new way we're going to try to do things with Wizards Brew. Next week, we're going to have a deeper look at Amonkhet after the full set comes out. So if you're wondering why we missed that bomb rare or that awesome card that came out on Thursday. Again, we're recording on Tuesdays, so we're going to be a couple days behind. We're going to be just a little bit behind the news every so often. So again, thanks for listening to us. If you want to catch us in between episodes, we have our official Twitter that is at WizBrewCast. You can email us at wizardsbrewcast@gmail.com. Danny and I have our Twitters in the show description. Make sure to check it out, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, guys. Have fun.